If there's a significant amount of people in these companies that are not local to you, then the events naturally should be webinars. If they are local, then these events ideally should be in person. If in your facility you have a conference room or a classroom or something like that where you can host at least 10, 15, 20 people, you largely have what you need. And the great part, you can host these events for very, very little because you already have your office, you already have your facility, warehouse, whatever it is, rented. And this is a space where you can just simply invite people in for a 60 or 90-minute breakfast seminar or lunch and learn, and for the cost of just a little bit of catering or bringing in some drinks, refreshments. And the format's pretty simple. You have 10 or 12 goals and challenges, tackle one of those a month over the next 10 or 12 months, invite a couple hundred people, ideally 30 or 40 people say yes. It's a free event. Welcome to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's live show, where each week I address a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities ecosystem. This includes from data center operators like hyperscale, colocation, edge, modular, wholesale data center providers, as well as data center technology companies, data center facilities related companies, data center construction related and investment kinds of companies, as well as the vibrant outsourced sales and marketing ecosystem in and around data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. And regardless of where you sit on the go-to-market team, maybe you work as a account executive, a sales development or business development rep, or an account manager or client success. Maybe you're in some facet of marketing like digital events, field marketing, content marketing, product management, channel partnerships. If your company has a channel marketing organization, channel sales related organization, or perhaps you are the executive leader, the executive sponsor who is responsible for going out into the competitive talent marketplace and recruiting the best and the brightest to join your team. And most of all, getting people into the right seats on the bus, the right places on the boat, rowing the boat at the right tempo, playing their musical instruments at the right volume at the exact right time, to orchestrate this magical period of magnificent growth in and around all things data center, artificial intelligence, supercomputing, high performance computing, and all of this frankly insane growth that is going on in this space right now. If this is the first time that you are joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us. If you're a frequent flyer, if you've been with us before, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us as well. And please let us know in the comments what you do in the data center ecosystem. We would love to know. So what is on the agenda for this week's show? First, we're going to start by talking about how a data center energy management consulting firm can create more effective go-to-market, more effective GTM. After that, we'll turn our attention to how a data center simulation, design, and data management company improves its brand recognition in the hyper-competitive global marketplace. Next, we'll talk about how a data center developer can find an anchor tenant for its new data center project. After that, we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And during the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how a data center equipment cooling company can find its niche. After that, we'll get into how an innovative data center energy solutions provider can improve its lead generation. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk all about sustainability and energy efficiency, and in particular, how a data center sustainability and energy efficiency consultancy can sell UPS, uninterruptible power supply, and critical power. If you have an idea for a topic or a question that you think we should address in an upcoming show, please be sure to leave that in the comments and we will add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. And if you want to make sure that you stay in the loop about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question, first topic, which is, how does a data center energy management consulting firm create more effective go-to-market? How does a data center energy management consultancy create more effective GTM? That is a fantastic question. So just to make sure that we're on the same page, oriented in the same part of the data center ecosystem, when it comes to energy management, we're talking about a facilities related company, right? So it's not a data center operator. It's not a data center technology company. It's not a data center construction company, although for sure you likely partner with data center construction company in various parts of the real estate ecosystem. However, what's super important to be clear about is data center energy management is solidly within the facilities ecosystem. So it sits side by side with power and cooling, commissioning, decommissioning, physical security, all host of facilities related issues in and around data centers. So for a company that's specializing in energy management consulting, professional services, helping their clients that are likely a mixture of data center operators and enterprises with their own data centers better utilize energy, better manage their energy resources, how do you get in front of the right folks? How do you make sure that you have an effective way of going to market? And what it largely comes down to is, for this kind of firm, is understanding where you've done best in the past. As I just alluded to, what will likely happen for a huge company that's in this space, like a Fortune 500 company in this space, and there are a handful, you can likely afford to fire on all cylinders at once. You can go in a lot of different directions, a lot of different geographic regions, a lot of different verticals, a lot of different business models. For a smaller firm, and by smaller firm, I would say anything like 200 employees or less, certainly 50 employees or less. And it becomes super important to become really, really focused if it's a really small firm of like 10 employees or less. The smaller your firm is, the more important it is for you to be really laser focused on your area of specialization. And I think the first area of specialization for energy management is narrowing down whether you're going to primarily work with enterprises that have their own data centers or data center operators. And then within data center operators, are you specializing in hyperscale operators? Are you specializing in colocation operators? Are you specializing in edge data center operators? Maybe you work primarily with modular data center providers. Each has its own unique set of energy management related challenges. So when we're trying to find the most effective go-to-market, a lot of finding that most effective go-to-market is understanding where you've had the most success in the past, where your clients have been happiest in the past. This is your sense of product market fit, knowing exactly who your ideal clients are, the products or services, the energy management related consulting services they purchase from you, the price points, the sales cycle, the lifetime value of those clients, all the basic unit economics that you'd know once you've achieved product market fit PMF, so you know how to generate and satisfy strong demand. As you've scaled up your sales team, you likely have go-to-market fit, meaning that you go, whether you're bootstrapped, whether you're venture-backed, whether you're private equity, you're infusing capital. And as you put more capital into your business, you know with a high degree of certainty that you'll have a consistent set of lead generation, lead nurturing, opportunity generation, new clients, They'll have a predictable set of deliverables, predictable set of outcomes, predictable set of retention, all of that well known. So you have go-to-market fit. If you decide to have channel partners, which is certainly a possibility within the realm of data center energy management, there certainly are some natural ecosystem partners aside from more generalist consulting professional services firms. All of that product market fit, go to market fit, channel partner market fit gives you a sense of the pattern recognition of knowing what's working. And when I look at your website, I will likely get a sense of how that's working by looking for your logos that you have displayed on your homepage, looking at your case studies, looking at your testimonials. If none of that is there, at the absolute minimum, we should be able to go into your CRM, your customer relationship management system, and look at things like Net Promoter Score, clients that are generating the most revenue, clients that have been with you the longest, a whole host of metrics that'll give you an idea as to what's working really well. Because once we know what's working really well, then we can develop an effective go-to-market. If we don't know what's working really well, then a lot of the job at this point is accelerating the pace of progress and the experimentation that gets you closer to understanding who these ideal clients are and the kinds of services they purchase from your firm and the price points and all of the things that will give you that sense that you've reached a company milestone where you have achieved and are sustaining product market fit. So with that in mind, we should be able to define your ideal client profile, geographically where are these clients located. In the case of energy management, these are likely not going to be engagements that can be delivered virtually. You'll almost certainly be sending your staff, be sending engineers on site to visit your clients' facilities. So the geographic part of your ideal client profile becomes a pretty big deal. You need to know where you have team members, where you have contractors, where you have presence, where you can actually successfully market, sell, and service these energy management clients in a particular geographic region. Next, on your ideal client profile, your ICP, we need to understand how big or small these clients are. We already talked about business models, like the split between an enterprise data center as well as data center operators. And even within data center operators, is it colocation operators? Is it hyperscale operators? Is it edge operators? Are they modular data center providers? Are they wholesale data center providers, more like data center developers? That should give you some clarity on the business model, but we also would do well to understand what size companies you're able to successfully market, sell, and service these energy management engagements within. In other words, like, you know what your minimum level of engagement is, right? Like, so with that in mind, how big does a client need to be able to afford you? This usually is not an issue with enterprise data centers, because if they built and are maintaining a data center, they certainly can afford professional services for something as important as energy management. But it could become more of an issue with like colocation operators. A lot of colocation operators are, I don't want to say mom and pop, but they're small, closely held, owner operated, 5, 10, 20, a couple dozen employees with a single location or two, and maybe doing a couple $1 million a year in revenue, or your local currency equivalent. At that size, they may not have unlimited resources for energy management consulting. And again, it depends on how well you've productized your service and what your entry level point is. But either way, you know what your minimum level of engagement is. With that in mind, what's the floor? What's the minimum size a potential client needs to be a good fit for you? Is it 10 employees? Is it 50 employees? Is it 200 employees? It's probably, for this kind of business model, somewhere in that 50 to 200. I don't know, maybe it's 500 plus employees. Only you can answer that depending on the minimum level of engagement for what the floor needs to be. Conversely, at the other extreme, if a prospect or client is so large, do they overwhelm your ability to be able to handle them effectively given your current team resources today? In other words, sure, everyone would love to be able to have Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 kinds of clients that have seemingly bottomless or at least significantly large budgets for figuring out energy management challenges. That said, is your company ready for the financial demands, for the legal, the compliance demands, for the integration demands, for the travel demands, for the complexity of all the different stakeholders, decision makers that are involved in all of this? Or have you figured out where your sweet spot is? Maybe your sweet spot is you're looking for potential clients that have anywhere from, say, 50 employees up to 5,000 employees, or 50 employees up to 1,000 employees, or something like that. Super important to get really specific about that as you define your go-to-market playbook and you really dial in who the best clients are. And then aside from their geographic location, aside from their company size, notice when we talk about company size, I didn't get into megawatts. I didn't get into square feet or square meters. I'm really just talking about company size, because when it comes to your go-to-market, at some point, you're likely going to use some of the popular prospecting tools, and nearly all of those tools normalize based on number of employees, based on headcount, or in some cases revenue. But it's relatively rare where you'll be able to have a perfect one-to-one relationship between the power capacity in that particular location, or the space, or the density, or anything like that. It's usually going to normalize based on number of employees, based on headcount. The third area of your ideal client profile that's critical to nail down to have a more effective go-to-market is their business model. Their business model. Why is that especially important? Well, we talked before a few minutes ago about that there's enterprises that have their own data centers, and they will, and in many cases, in most cases, have energy management challenges. And certainly different kinds of data center operators have different kinds of energy management challenges. If you think about the sheer size of a hyperscale data center campus compared to the size of an edge data center, can be a world of difference, right? So different kinds of energy management challenges. How about modular data centers, where they can be put on a flatbed and moved from location? They have different energy management challenges as well, because where are they plugging into? Are they plugging into grid power? Are they using diesel generators? Are they on some kind of alternative fuel, like fuel cells, or small modular reactor nuclear? Like, what are they using for? And there's different unique energy challenges with that as well. That can vary quite a bit depending on where that modular data center is. So yeah, there's like this business model industry niche specialization as well that can be a really, really powerful way to dial in your go-to market. Another thing to think about as well is there's certain industries when you get into the enterprise data centers that may be a better fit for you than others. And some of this as well is there's certain geographic regions where there's certain kinds of compliance or accreditations that you'll want to have to be successful in the energy management space, depending on where in the world you're located in. So either your professionals, either your company has those credentials or you don't. And some of that may vary. It's usually the industry issues are usually more of an issue on the technology side of data centers. But yeah, for sure, there can be certain industries that are a better fit for you than others if you're working primarily with enterprise data centers. So once you have all of that ideal client profile stuff nailed down, and it should be dialed in enough that like a one-page Google Doc has all these details. From there, you can build out a target account list of potential clients that fit those criteria that you'd love to be doing business with in the coming months, in the coming years. And from that target account list, then we need to figure out who are the most important stakeholders in these kinds of companies that we need to build awareness with, that we need to educate and build trust with. And depending on the company sizes that you're targeting, you'll either have if you're targeting huge companies, you'll have a very granular segmentation strategy. If you're targeting smaller companies, you'll have fewer buyer personas, a more tight segmentation strategy, just because in smaller companies, people tend to wear a lot of hats. And in larger companies, they take on a lot of different roles, a lot of different responsibilities under one single job. Whereas in much larger companies, you'll tend to find a lot more extreme specialization. So a lot more different kinds of stakeholders involved. But when it comes to energy management for enterprises, for huge hyperscales, for huge operators, there will literally be people with the word energy in their job title. If it's not energy, it's probably facilities or some kind of engineering, whereas in a smaller like colocation operator, it may just be a data center manager or a data center facilities manager. And again, you're targeting for these buyer personas for what you're going to use as the basis for doing your customer insight research and figuring out what's going on in their world, what their biggest goals and challenges are, how that affects your website copywriting, your product marketing, your sales enablement, your email marketing strategy, your social strategy, your event strategy. Your event strategy should be a big part of that. All of that should be grounded in figuring out who your primary and secondary, maybe who even your tertiary buyer personas are, the single most important, the second most important, maybe the third most important kind of stakeholder on this kind of engagement and what's going on in each of their worlds. From there, one of the most effective ways to build out pipeline and accelerate pipeline for an energy management consulting firm is to figure out a way to get a lot of face time, a lot of positive relationship building interactions with the most important stakeholders in these potential clients in a way that they see you as experts, not as a vendor who's trying to sell them productized energy management services, energy management consulting services, but as the be-all end-all expert when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center energy management. And one of the most effective ways to do this over an extended period of time is by hosting educational events for your most important buyer personas in your target accounts, ideally one buyer persona at a time. Meaning that the topics that you would talk about in a monthly webinar series or a monthly lunch and learn series for a ESG executive, environmental social governance kind of executive, would be different than what you would talk about with an energy manager or a data center engineer or facilities manager, each depending on how closely clustered these segmentation strategy could have different goals and challenges. And let's say, for argument's sake, we're talking about a facilities manager of a co-location operator with anywhere from 50 to 500 employees. So you look at that facilities manager, you figured out a handful of their biggest goals, a handful of the biggest challenges, and you've gotten those goals and challenges articulated in their own words. Why is it so important to get them in their own words? Because if you just guess, your language may be off. And if your language is off, your messaging really doesn't resonate. So once we know those 5 or 6 biggest goals, those 5 or 6 biggest challenges, we have 10 or 12 topics. Guess what? 10 or 12 lines up pretty well. One topic a month over the next 10 or 12 months. That's your monthly webinar series, your monthly breakfast seminars, your monthly lunch and learn. If your target account list has a lot of companies that are in a really close drivable range to where your location, your office location, your facility, wherever you could potentially host small events is located, fantastic. Run these as in-person events. And you don't, when it's this highly targeted to very specific ideal clients on a target account list and very specific buyer personas, you do not need large number of attendees to really start to move the needle in a very profound way. In other words, like if you have a classroom or a conference room in your office that can hold 15, 20 people, and you're consistently filling that up every Wednesday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. with a different group from a different persona coming in and 15, 20 people learning from your experts about something that can help them do their job better. Wow, can that have a game-changing impact over an extended period of time? Because if you think about in a self-driven journey where most of your prospects and clients are more sales allergic than they've ever been, they don't want to spend time with sales development reps or account executives anymore, but these same buyer personas still need to learn. They still have a whole bunch of goals that they're working on individually, as a team, as a company, a lot of challenges that they're struggling with. And to the extent that your internal subject matter experts can show up in a way that teaches valuable best practices and strategies that your most important buyer personas can use to do their job better, it can have a game-changing impact on the relationship that you build with those prospects and clients. So essentially, you're getting out of the vendor box. And by getting out of the vendor box and instead showing up looking a lot more like a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, this can have a massive, massive impact, positive impact on your pipeline generation. Because when the right people are spending enough time with your experts, the know, like, and trust really, really accelerates fast. You're essentially indoctrinating them about all your best practices and how world-class companies in their space have approached these kinds of energy management challenges in their data center facilities. And you think about like a typical buyer's journey where one of your personas has 25 or 30 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. If you do a monthly series like this, you're giving, aside from just basic like email marketing touch points and social media touch points, if you do a monthly webinar series like this, or a monthly lunch and learn series like this, and one or more of your buyer personas are lined up with attending these on a regular basis, your goal really should be to saturate the surface area of as many of those 25 to 30 touch points as possible. So your ideal clients are learning so much from your experts that's satisfying so much of their learning and development, professional development requirements for what they need to do their job better. There's no time or interest left for them to look to your competitors to see if they're having similar educational programming. So this really not only guarantees that you get on and stay on the short list, but in many cases, when you do this really well, you're proactively disqualifying your competitors from gaining or retaining a place on the short list. So by the time they're finally in market, finally ready for a decision stage sales conversation, you've built up so much know, like, and trust. You've educated and built and trust so much when it comes to the topics that are top of mind for that particular buyer persona that you got rid of the price sensitivity. You've stacked the decks tremendously in your favor, and you've ended up exactly what you wanted. You ended up from a really strong point of differentiation and competitive positioning for anything and everything that you're looking to do with growing your data center energy management consulting firm. So that's how I would approach for a data center energy management consulting firm that's looking to create a more effective go-to-market, is to really understand who these ideal clients are, who these buyer personas are within these ideal clients. The ideal client profile is like at the account level or the company level. The buyer personas are the individual stakeholders within the company. I would really understand what the individual stakeholders are trying to achieve from an energy management perspective that lines up with their job, and what they're struggling with most from an energy management perspective. And to the extent that you can proactively provide fantastically valuable educational events experiences, you will really, really stack the decks in your favor for creating a more effective go-to-market. So that's how a data center energy management consulting firm can create effective GTM, effective go-to-market. Cool. So what do we have up next? Oh, by the way, if you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word. So what do we have up next? How does a data center simulation, design, and data management company improve its brand recognition? How does a company that's primarily in the business of data center simulation, data center design, and data management improve its brand recognition? That's a fantastic question. And it's a little complicated. I'll tell you why. Because when it comes to simulation, there are companies within data center technology that are really good at simulation. And there's companies within data center facilities that are really good at simulation. There's also some companies in the real estate construction space that get really good at simulation. So we need to figure out from a business model perspective what you actually do, what you're actually simulating. Are you simulating the technology implementation in a data center facility? Are you simulating the power, the cooling, the engineering, various physical issues within a data center facility? Or are you simulating flooding? Are you simulating grading? Are you simulating the thickness of the slab to support particular weights of racks and power density? What are you actually simulating? So which part of the data center ecosystem are you located within? If your company also provides data center design as part of this trifecta of services, simulation, design, and data management, it will likely give us a clue that you're operating within construction, real estate, and investment. So just to review, at DCSMI, we categorize the data center ecosystem into 5 broad areas: operators, technology, facilities, construction/real estate/investment, and outsourced sales and marketing. So when it comes to data center design, we consider that an integral part of data center construction, real estate, and investment. The data center designer is like the first cousin of the data center construction, the data center general contractors. So if a company that's also in the business of data center design is also providing data center simulation and data management, that data management likely strongly skews on the construction, real estate, and perhaps a little bit of the facilities related side. So if you're looking to improve your brand recognition in the data center ecosystem, digital infrastructure, critical facilities, knowing that you have these three lines of business, what the first question that I always ask is when there's three lines of business, is it the same client that's buying all three of these services from your company? Is it the same exact kind of client that will buy simulation, design, and data management, or are they three different kinds of clients? If it's three different kinds of clients, you have a potentially really complicated brand building challenge that you need to work through. If it's one kind of client who buys most or all of these services, it gets quite a bit simpler. What I will say is, even before we get too deep into brand recognition, is the definition of what branding is today is very different than it was as recently as 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we had a buyer's journey where your typical prospects and clients for things related to construction and real estate investment, certainly design and simulation and data management for construction and real estate, your typical prospect or client would get about halfway through their journey, and then they'd be ready to meet with someone from your team in the context of like a pre-sales conversation, whether it was a sales developer, a business developer, an account executive, something like that. In the mid 2010s, the prevailing number that was thrown around was from CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner, was that prospects and clients would get about 56% of the way through their journey with self-driven research. And then for the final 44%, they'd be open to having conversations with a member from your team. So that wasn't too bad. At least you were in there for the final 44% of the journey. However, that 56% number, that 44% coverage area on your part is now very much a distant memory. 10 years of digital transformation, millions of baby boomers retiring, a lot more millennials and Gen Z in decision-making roles, tens of millions of people that got used to working from home in the beginning of the 2020s. And that 56% number has jumped all the way to 83%. And we see no signs of that slowing down anytime soon. In other words, Gartner's showing that 83% of a typical journey, researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing now happens before vendor contact. In other words, even if you do everything perfectly for your data center simulation, design, and data management services, you will likely only have your sales team be able to be in there and get a word in edgewise for the final 17% of research and decision making, meaning that their 83% of their mind is made up before you get to meet a prospecting client. And wow, that's a huge challenge. The problem with that is your prospects and clients are learning about these topics, are learning about their biggest goals and their biggest challenges from someone. We need to figure out a way for that someone to be you, for that someone to be members of your team, members of your own company. And the way we do that is to lean into the fact that as vendors, as sales professionals, people have never been more sales allergic. The self-driven buyer's journey is a really, really big deal. And because of generative AI and ChatGPT and all the tools like that, it's going to accelerate even faster. There's already pockets of the data center ecosystem where that 83% number has jumped to 100%, meaning that it's a self-service sign up now where people are literally signing up for certain kinds of products and services in an e-commerce fashion directly on a website, completely bypassing traditional marketing and sales and SDRs and AEs. And so far, that's only been in low-cost commoditized parts of the ecosystem, but there's definitely a lot of competitive pressure for companies to experiment with. This originally started in support, right? With support ticket deflection. And the next scenario is, okay, well, your account executives, they're really driven, but they're still only available 55, 60 hours a week of 168 hours a week. So what do you do to have that full round the clock coverage? Enter conversational chat. So this is the competition. This is what we need to be thinking about in order for us to earn our way back in the early and middle stages of the journey, where there's a chance to shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options in front of them for data center simulation, design, and data management. We need to get out of the vendor box, and we need to stay out of the vendor box. And the best way to get you out of the vendor box and have you stay out of the vendor box is to have a significant presence in the early and the middle stages and the formative stages of the buyer's journey. And in order to do that, we need to rebrand, reposition, change out your traditional job titles so that you and your team members look a lot more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center simulation, data center design, and data management that is relevant for a very specific kind of buyer persona in a very specific kind of geographic region and a very specific kind of company size, perhaps even within a specific kind of industry. And the more hyper relevant your educational resources are, the more it's like someone gets invited to this event and they're like, whoa, so this is for people that want to know more about data center design and data center simulation and data center management, that are data center development executives or construction executives from mid-market telecommunications companies in a particular geographic region. Like, it gets to the point where it's so ridiculously specific that it's like grabbing them by the virtual shirt collar and pulling them into the landing page and the registration. Like, I got to see this. Wow, I've never seen anyone have anything that's that ridiculously relevant. And I look at the description and the bullet points. How the heck did they know that we're struggling with these exact issues? Well, they knew because they did their buyer persona research. They did their customer insight research. So the key for you, if you want to get out of that vendor box and truly differentiate, improve your competitive positioning, neutralize competitive forces, is to recognize that your brand is no longer just about aesthetics. 10 years ago, like, a creative director would have had control over your fonts and your hexadecimal colors and your logos. And like, you needed a PhD in Adobe Creative Suite to be an authority on brand recognition. In a self-driven buyer's journey, however, your brand is no longer just those superficial aesthetic kind of branding, touchy feely kind of stuff. Your brand is now everything that the marketplace says about you when you're not in the room. And given that you're no longer in the room for most of the journey, your content and your events are your last chance to get back in the room. It is your last chance to be able to improve and grow your brand reputation within the marketplace. The problem is, you are literally, as a member of your go-to-market team in a sales or marketing or product or channel partnership kind of role, you are literally in direct competition with people's self-driven, self-research instincts. And you're in competition for, can they find instant answers from a generative AI tool or from YouTube or from asking their peers on a LinkedIn? So we really have to be extreme next level and be able to deliver value to be able to build this brand recognition in the marketplace. Now, there's quite a few people in our industry that are significantly confused, where they feel like they can rent someone's brand recognition and someone's brand reputation for a couple of hours or a couple of days at a time. And this is the reason why I think a lot of companies blindly invest in spending a ton of budget on big national and global conferences, because they feel like they're renting the credibility, the aggregate credibility of the conference producer for a couple of days. And they're hoping that halo not only stays with them throughout the whole event, but for the weeks and months after that event. The challenge, however, is you're trying to create a shortcut. And it's not just that you're creating a shortcut, is that there's 99 other exhibitors at the conference who are trying to do the exact same thing. And you're basically, if there's 480 minutes that the exhibit floor is open on any given day, and it's evenly divided among 100 companies, even if people spend 100% of their time at that conference on the exhibit floor, which we know is not even anywhere near reality, because the exhibits are competing for attention with the educational sessions. And we know in a lot of scenarios, the conference producers have to resort to having some pretty amazing open hospitality bars and appetizers and everything, and punch cards and giveaways and everything to get people to visit the booths. But even assuming that, the challenge is you have extreme competition for people's attention in that context. The reality is, at a big national and global conference, only really 2 or 3%, maybe 5% of the people that are attending get to do much education and trust building. The people that are doing the education and trust building are the people that are speaking. If you're not speaking at a conference, or someone from your team is not speaking at a conference, you're really not getting to do much education and trust building. And even if you are, you're splitting that education and trust building among 99 other companies. And that's split off from the split between people going to sessions and having casual conversations and actually visiting the booth. And that assumes that in the first place, you did some pretty good ICP, ideal client profile due diligence, on the conference in the first place, and you made sure that their demographics and their media kit from last year and this year, forecasted for this year, line up reasonably well with your ideal client profile. In other words, the majority of their last year's attendance and projected this year's attendance lines up really, really well with your ideal client profile. If it doesn't, then yeah, it's like how many cuts. You don't need 100 paper cuts to be able to be in a huge trouble here. It's like literally 2 or 3 cuts, and you realize that, whoa, I thought there was going to be 2,500 good people to speak there. And when reality is we cut and we cut and we cut, and like, there's maybe 250 people that matter. And of those 250 people that matter, 80% have the wrong sales title. And then we're splitting that time among 99 other companies. And then you start to be like, what are we doing here? So if you're trying to improve your brand recognition, get really tight on that ideal client profile. Really, really tight on that ideal client profile. Get really tight on that target account list. Get really tight on those buyer personas. And think about how you can improve your average session time, your minutes of educational content that they are consuming with you, seeing you as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, and trusted advisors. And when you are hosting your own educational events, guess what? There may only be 15 or 20 people in the room, and you were chasing a vanity metric. But of those 15 or 20 people that are in the room, I bet all or nearly all of them line up pretty well with your account-based marketing, with your ICP. Why? Because you invited them to the event. And the cool part is when you're providing enough value, promise of value in that headline and in that topic, they're going to be pretty highly motivated to bring their peers, maybe even their boss, along with them. And you start to realize that you're starting to proactively drive alignment in the formative awareness and consideration stages of that journey, which is one of the most important remaining functions for an account executive in the first place, is being a fantastic project manager to help your internal champion drive alignment across his or her teams and other important teams within the company. So that's why when it comes to building brand recognition, I am incredibly bullish on getting really tight on your ideal client profile and your target account list and your prioritized buyer personas, and hosting amazingly impactful educational events on an ongoing basis. So they come back month after month, they bring more and more people from their team, and you're dramatically improving your surface area that you have among multiple stakeholders within those target accounts that could be a fantastic fit for your data center simulation, data center design, and data management services. That's one of the strongest ways to improve your brand recognition in this hyper competitive global space, is really dial in that ideal client profile, really dial in those prioritized buyer personas, understand their 5 or 6 biggest goals, their 5 or 6 biggest challenges, segment each so they each get their own series. So you're not trying to cover too much at once. So you're getting really, really hyper specific about who they are and what they care about, and have patience and execute that playbook. And the fantastic part with executing that kind of playbook is it costs a tiny fraction of putting yourself in these situations where you're competing against 99 other vendors and the educational context against a ideal client profile mismatch that may not have been the strongest fit in the first place. So if you're really, really serious about improving that brand recognition, get laser focused on who they are, what company they come from, and what they care most about, and figure out a way for those prioritized buyer personas to spend a lot of time with you in learning development, professional development mode. So your internal subject matter experts, perhaps some of your external subject matter experts, maybe some contractors or vendors you work with, are leading the charge on providing these amazingly helpful educational, professional development, learning and development kind of experiences and events for the most important people in these target accounts. So that's how I would approach how a data center simulation, design, and data management company can improve its brand recognition. If you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure to hit the like button. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments so we can add that to the consideration queue for topics for an upcoming episode of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. Okay, so what do we have up next? So this one is for the data center, like the intersection of data center real estate and a specific kind of data center operator. So how does a data center developer find its anchor tenant for a new data center project? How does a data center developer find an anchor tenant for a new data center? Well, there's two basic approaches at a really high level. You can partner with a DCRE, a data center real estate firm, and there certainly are global firms, there's national firms, and there's small local firms. The ones that are really well known in this industry tend to have global and national footprints because they have large armies of incredible levels of talent and have spent hundreds of millions, if not billions, of investment building a strong brand. They speak at all the conferences, they're constantly exhibiting there. And there's massive brand equity in place. So option number one is you can hire that. Option number two is you can hire your own internal team to build awareness and build pipeline and get that deal over the finish line for an anchor tenant. And when you're doing this, this looks a lot like enterprise sales, except you're hiring someone with deep expertise in negotiating very large can be all relative. You're looking anchor tenant for a huge hyperscale campus as opposed to an anchor tenant for a colocation, a small to mid-sized colocation facility. Again, there's two basic approaches. You can either outsource it completely to a data center real estate firm. You can hire internally. The reality is usually you're picking one or the other. It's not likely that you're going to do both. What I've seen a lot of data center developers, especially small ones too, is in a perfect world, they'd love to have the anchor tenants be brought in by real estate. And then for the smaller deals where people are taking a couple racks or a couple cabinets, where the unit economics are strong enough to justify inside sales, but definitely something where they need to build up more muscle memory because they're going to need to do a few dozen times, that they'll hire an internal team. And with that internal team, they're going to do a mix of the similar kind of playbook that like a co-location operator would use, meaning that there's like hyper local marketing and sales, and then there's long distance marketing and sales. The hyper local usually involves things like open houses, sponsoring local meetups, either in your facility or going out and sponsoring other technology events, having some of your subject matter experts go speak at other local community kind of tech events that are hyper relevant for the people that would be a great tenant for your data center facility. And then once you truly understand the ideal clients and you understand the personas, you potentially take the same kind of educational content that you would use to host your own events internally, and you'd run those as webinars as well. Now, the challenge with all of this is for data center developers that are relatively new to a particular market or relatively new to a business, you don't really have a playbook to go on for who your ideal clients are. For data center developers that have done this a dozen times already, or that have hired away a team of others that have done this a dozen times already in this particular geographic market, you start to have a sense for who these ideal clients, who these ideal tenants are. So you don't waste a lot of time on clients that are too big, because once you get beyond the anchor tenant, an anchor tenant by definition is anchor tenant singular as opposed to having anchor tenants. So once you get beyond that anchor tenant to what is an anchor tenant going to take 25 or 50% of the space or something like that? It depends on what you're actually looking to do. Then you're trying to figure out what your minimums are going forward with that. And usually for renting out, for leasing out smaller blocks of spaces, you're going to use a combination of internal account executives, that are responsible for lead generation or following up on inbound leads and giving tours and pipeline and helping to consultative selling with their prospects and clients. And you may also likely, a very common playbook for data center operators is working with channel partners, working with like managed service providers, network integrators, perhaps master agents, and all will have slightly different kind of needs and business models. But instead of those folks getting hired as full-time salaried employees plus commission, they're 100% commission only. So in other words, they get paid for based on performance. Obviously, they need to get paid a higher percentage than your internal account executives, your internal sales professionals that work for you full-time, because they're doing all of their own marketing and they're selling. And potentially a lot of the reason why they're interested in a partnership with a company like yours is, one is their clients are leaning on them to give them advice and recommendations on anything and everything having to do with IT. And second, there's almost always going to be additional revenue streams that come up as a direct result of that particular channel partner helping their clients make the decision to place infrastructure in your facility. That's, in other words, this is where the channel partner is selling managed services on an initial and on an ongoing basis that your company doesn't provide as part of its core services. So usually the data center developer looks to sell the property or lease the property out to someone that comes in and has those operator chops, because they typically their core competency is site selection, all of the negotiations with local community stakeholders, construction, commissioning. And once that's done, once there's power to shell, in most cases, they want to move on to the next project and have a operator kind of business take over running that facility on a regular basis. But in terms of finding its anchor tenant, there's basically two schools of thought. Is either you're going to have like a sales executive, a small sales team that's responsible for getting that ideal client profile, target account list, educating and building trust, generating leads with potential clients, ideally pre-leasing before the construction is very far along. In most cases, they'll still continue to lease even once the facility is up and running. So that's your internal team. And then usually a lot of data center developers are very enamored with the idea of the anchor tenant being the responsibility of a DCRE, of a data center real estate firm. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how a data center developer can find an anchor tenant for a new data center. Usually when we're talking about anchor tenants, we're usually talking about huge facilities, huge campuses. It could be colocation. It usually would be like wholesale or hyperscale or something like that. When we think about the other business models around data center operators, data center providers, usually this would not be edge that we're talking about. Usually this wouldn't be modular, but it could very well. Data center developers are a real close first cousin of like wholesale data center providers and hyperscale data center providers, like massive campuses looking for that either single tenants or one tenant taking a huge percentage and the rest being more traditional multi-tenant. So those are some considerations for how a data center developer can find an anchor tenant for a new data center. So that brings us to just about the halfway point for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. When we come back in the second half, we'll tackle 3 more of your biggest sales and marketing challenges when it comes to all things related to go-to-market for data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you are watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities ecosystem. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you like to watch on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. So what do we have up next? Our next question is, this one's on the facility side. How does a data center equipment cooling company find its niche? How does a data center equipment cooling company find its niche? That's an interesting question, because that sounds by definition that your company is relatively early stage, because if you're still trying to find your niche, that likely means that your company does not yet have product market fit. You don't yet know who your ideal clients are. You don't exactly know what the ideal products and services that they're purchasing from you. You haven't really figured out the price points yet, or lifetime value, or any kind of recurring revenue, or cost of acquisition, or sales cycle length, or margins, or anything that usually comes with figuring that out. So what that means by definition is your company's early stage, probably a little bit on the smaller side. And for the kind of company that does equipment cooling, trying to find its niche, I wouldn't be surprised if you're at the stage where you certainly have 50 or fewer employees. You may have 10 or fewer employees, and you're trying to accelerate the race to knowing the answers to these questions, knowing this niche. So in this particular case, one of the most important things that you can do is to improve the frequency at which you're having touch points with potential clients. So most of the time, a company that's a startup that's in equipment cooling is likely you as the owner or the partner or co-founder, at least one of you likely has some background doing this for another company. It could be that you were doing this for a much larger company, a company that's slightly larger in a different geographic region, in a different niche, but it's likely that there's some pattern recognition of what's worked based on other stops in your career before you decided to launch this new company focusing on equipment cooling. So with that in mind, you do really need a 1.0 hypothesis, a 1.0 version of what you think your niche should be. But the goal with all of this is to try to accelerate this so you're getting feedback faster. So based on this, like, where are your ideal clients going to be located? Because when it comes to equipment cooling, for sure, this is not going to be a service, a product that's delivered virtually. You're physically visiting facilities for site surveys. You're physically visiting facilities for the installing, for the commissioning, for the ongoing maintenance. So you need to have geographic presence where you're marketing and selling and servicing your equipment cooling products and related services. So what that means is, as a relatively small company, your initial addressable market, your initial geographic region for your ideal clients will likely be focused on a relatively narrow geographic area that you can drive to within 30, 60 minutes, maybe an hour or two at the most. One, because as a small company, like, you need to really pick your competitive battles. And two, from a practical standpoint, being able to get to the client site fast and often is super important. The second part is, as a relatively new company that hasn't yet achieved product market fit and found its niche, like, what's the right size client for your company? And this may change over time, but as a relatively new, not yet established business, you may find that although it would be fantastic to be able to have a very well recognized brand on your homepage with your logo, that they've done some work with you, you may find that very challenging in the short term, especially if you don't have a deep bench of relationships in a company like that already. Even if you do, for a lot of companies that are relatively new, they may find that the sales cycle length, the financial requirements, the certification requirements, the insurance requirements, the integration requirements just completely overwhelm a relatively new company. Now, the flip side is they need to be a certain size to be able to afford your equipment in the first place. So this is, again, if you're trying to get definitive answers on, like, what's the minimum size company, what's the maximum size company that's a good fit, you may have some instincts based on prior stops in your career, but a lot of what you're trying to figure out with getting to that niche is geographic and company size. As like a 1.0 version of that, based on some limited understanding of this niche, working with clients that do things related to data center cooling. For a new company, it's probably working with clients that have anywhere from maybe 50 to 500 employees. And again, over indexing on companies that are located in really close proximity to where you are. Why is 50 to 500 a good range? Well, at 5 or 10 million or your local currency equivalent, probably have some budget, but are not going to overwhelm you in bureaucratic red tape and long sales cycle and internal politics and everything that make it nearly impossible to get traction or get to the multiple decision makers, multiple stakeholders within that company. In terms of niches, when it comes to like industries or business models, that may be a big TBD early on for a company like yours. Like, is it data center operators that are the best fit for your equipment cooling? Like, or is it, and even more specifically, is it colo operators? Is it hyperscale operators? Is it edge operators? Maybe it's modular data center operators. They certainly have different kinds of cooling requirements than other kinds of data center operators, or maybe it's enterprises with their own data centers. Again, you don't know what you don't know, but we do need to have a 1.0 working version of what we think that ideal client profile is to start to make some initial traction. So geographically, where are they located? How big or small are their companies is defined by number of employees, like the bottom end of the range to be able to afford what you're offering, the upper end of the range at which you feel comfortable in those kinds of engagements with your current capabilities, your current resource capabilities, financial capabilities, inventory capabilities, and are there certain business models that are a better fit than others? From there, that should help you drive creating a target account list, sometimes known as account-based marketing, ABM, or account-based selling. And when you get down below the account level or the company level, who are the stakeholders that you want to create awareness that your company exists, that your cooling equipment exists, and that you need to educate and build trust with. And depending on the company sizes will drive the granularity or lack of granularity when it comes to how you're segmenting those personas, the individual kind of stakeholders within the companies. For a really small colocation operator, you're trying to get essentially to the owner, the CTO, the founder. Now, if you get to someone who reports to that person, or even reports to the person who reports to that person in a 50-person company, probably not a deal killer because everyone knows everyone. The name of the game with all of this is to educate and build trust. And the best way to educate and build trust is, in most cases, we want to lead with education, especially for a relatively unknown brand in this particular space. In order for us to lead with education, we need to know for this kind of stakeholder what is actually going on in their world that you can help them with as a leading indicator to them having some issues with needing help with data center cooling. And the way we figure out what those biggest goals and what those biggest challenges are for each of those personas is we do research. We can do research by face-to-face conversations, Zoom phone conversations. We can do surveys. We can study a stack of LinkedIn profiles. We can study what surfaces when we do search on particular people within these accounts. But at the end of the day, we need to figure out their 5 or 6 biggest goals and their 5 or 6 biggest challenges for this particular stakeholder that is largely a leading indicator that at some point they're going to need help with data center cooling. And the better job you do with understanding in their own words exactly what these 5 or 6 biggest goals are and exactly what these 5 or 6 biggest struggles or challenges are, the easier it is for you to create a compelling offer that resonates. What I would encourage you to do is, once you know these goals and challenges, is to create some downloadable and video and on-demand resources. And I would also take similar kinds of information and create some educational events that you invite these prioritized buyer personas to attend. If there's a significant amount of people in these companies that are not local to you, then the events naturally should be webinars. If they are local, which by definition, by your category, is probably where you're going to end up, then these events ideally should be in person. If in your facility you have a conference room or a classroom or something like that where you can host at least 10, 15, 20 people, you're off to the races. You largely have what you need in terms of facilities. And the great part with that is a relatively small upstart, probably budget constrained kind of company. You can host these events for very, very little, because you already have your office, you already have your facility, warehouse, whatever it is, rented. And this is a space where you can just simply, invite people in for a 60 or 90-minute breakfast seminar or lunch and learn, and for the cost of just a little bit of catering or bringing in some drinks, refreshments kind of stuff. And the format's pretty simple. You have 10 or 12 goals and challenges. Tackle one of those a month over the next 10 or 12 months. Invite a couple hundred people. Ideally, 30 or 40 people say yes. It's a free event, so maybe half will end up attending. So you get 15, 20 people that are attending, and they attend. Let's assume the event is going to be held from 8:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock in the morning. They arrive at 8:30. They have breakfast. They check in. They have a little bit of time for networking. At 9 o'clock, your featured speaker goes on, introduces himself, herself, gives a fantastic educational session that's so good that you're highly confident that if your expert gave that exact same session at a major conference, they'd get the highest reviews, ratings of anyone at the conference, or among the highest of any of the conference. So they give their talk for 25, 30, 40 minutes. It's small groups, so certainly make it interactive. Invite lots of participation in Q&A. Give a little bit more chance for Q&A immediately following. And in the case of equipment cooling as opposed to a data center tour, I'd make sure to integrate a demo, either with some equipment that you're bringing into the space where you're giving a talk, or immediately following your talk in the educational part of the event, you take them on a tour out in your warehouse, your factory, wherever it is, and give them a demo of how the equipment cooling actually works in practice. So they're getting a chance for a little bit of networking, having a little bit of breakfast, or you can certainly shift this over to a lunch event or even later in the day. Give a talk for 30 or 40 minutes, open it up for Q&A, and then take them on a tour. When you do this well with the right people, you shouldn't have to push too hard to find people that are super interested in learning more, potentially bringing their coworkers back for the second time around, potentially bringing their boss for when you're hosting. And again, 10 or 12 topics once a month over the next year. And this will do wonders to educate and build trust and build deeper relationships with the ideal clients and the target accounts that you want to be doing business with, that you want to have as clients for your equipment cooling company going forward. If you are successful in segmenting this out and you have a primary and a secondary and a tertiary kind of buyer persona, I would encourage you, once you have a little bit of practice in doing this well, to segment out so each persona has their own series. In other words, if this breakfast seminar or lunch and learn format is working well for you, the first week of the month, run this for your primary buyer persona. The second week of the month or the third week of the month, run a program just like this, but for your secondary buyer persona. If you have 3 different personas, well, 3 out of the 4 weeks of the month, you're running this fantastic breakfast seminar or lunch and learn. And the great part with all of this is, unlike traveling to national or global conferences, as long as you already have a suitable space, and again, by space, it doesn't need to be fancy or ornate. It literally could be a conference room or a classroom with a TV on the wall. Host 10, 15, 20 people. It will cost you almost nothing to host these events over and over again. It's just, in a breakfast seminar, you're bringing in some bagels and pastries and coffee for a lunch, and you're maybe bringing in some sandwich or pizza or something like that, a few $100s or your local currency equivalent. What you're mostly trying to do is to massively build up the know, like, and trust, where people in your target accounts see your internal experts as the be-all, end-all experts on anything and everything having to do with data center cooling. And to the extent you do this, magical sales cycle acceleration will happen pretty much organically without having to push too much. And it's also a fantastic way to integrate your marketers and your sales professionals into the education process. If your marketers or your sales professionals aren't technical enough on cooling equipment where they're the subject matter expert, there absolutely positively is a place for them to still be involved. They're the ones who are checking people in. They're the ones who are introducing the expert speaker. They're doing the coordination, the concierging kind of stuff, what they likely do best. For people on your team that come from a heavy engineering background, that really understand the R&D behind all of this, yeah, for sure they'll be your subject matter experts. And when you exhaust your internal subject matter experts, if there's consultants that you work with in the local area, if there's channel partners that you work with in the local area, if there's vendors that you work with, that you partner with, all of the above can be a fantastic supplement to this ongoing professional development program. So that's how we're getting you out of the vendor box. That's how we're getting your ideal clients to see your internal team as the be-all end-all experts and really dialing into understanding their goals and their challenges and figuring out a way for you to be a significant part of their professional development process and their learning and development. So you have a chance to explore and learn about what's going on internally for that company and teach them about some best practices on how others in that same kind of job function in similar companies in a similar geographic region, similar size, are approaching these very issues. So that's one of the most effective ways to find your niche, is to run these educational programs on a very regular cadence, potentially 2 or 3 tracks, essentially going different kinds of weeks. And the more frequent these touch points are, the more frequent they're learning from you, the more frequent you're going to be gathering feedback, and the more you're going to accelerate your learning. The great part with all of this is one of your biggest costs is just simply having a good CRM and a good email marketing program and getting the word out about these invitations, which you'd need to do anyway with all of the above. So I think that's one of the fastest ways to find your niche, is to get more time with more of the right people in an educational context. So even the most cynical, skeptical, sales allergic kinds of contacts in these companies are willing to let their guard down a little bit and open up about what they're really trying to achieve, because they see you as a trusted expert, not just a vendor that's trying to sell them data center cooling equipment. So that's how a data center equipment cooling company can find its niche, or accelerate at least the data and the cycles to be able to get closer to finding that niche and getting to product market fit and go to market fit, and really truly understanding your unit economics so you can scale the business more aggressively. Okay, what do we have up next? What is our next question for today? How does an innovative data center energy solutions provider improve its lead generation? How does an innovative data center energy solutions provider improve its lead generation? So usually the solutions provider or the service provider is a hybrid between a professional services firm and like a reseller, value-added reseller, managed service provider kind of integrator. Usually a solutions provider gives the connotation that you have channel partner relationships with one or more manufacturers in this space. So in the case of energy, at the risk of oversimplifying, maybe you have a relationship with, I don't want to drop specific names, but if you look at the podcast, the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, you can see a handful of some of the biggest data center energy related manufacturers and companies in the space that have appeared as guests on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. So a company that's a solution provider would, by definition, usually have relationships with one or more companies like that. You understand their product lines really well. You understand who the ideal clients are. And a lot of your responsibility is marketing, selling, servicing, installing these kinds of energy solutions for certain kinds of clients. You're an extension of that particular company's marketing, sales engine, and installation service and ongoing support engine. So when it comes to your own innovation, a lot of what that tells me is that you've thought about differentiation. And the reason that it's incredibly important for you to think about differentiation is, as a intermediary, as a channel partner, you certainly don't have an exclusive on being able to resell those kinds of energy solutions, products, and related services. So because of that, it's more important than ever that you think about what you're going to do to differentiate, competitively position, and drive innovation. And by definition, what that usually means is getting very specific about who your ideal clients are. And this can be challenging because a lot of solution providers face margin constraints by the nature of their business model. In other words, if they are selling the exact same products, the exact same solutions as a handful of other companies, they're perpetually in a cycle of having to bid, having to compete on price. So in order to drive innovation, we need to think about what you can do at various stages of the buyer's journey to develop like a proprietary twist, a proprietary way of scoping out, site surveying, needs analysis, configuring, customizing, bundling, implementing. What can you do that truly is innovative, that truly is differentiated, that's not easy to replicate by a half a dozen other companies that you may be competing with? So it sounds like you are already at the stage where you've thought that through and you have confidence that it's sticking with a certain kind of ideal client, in a geographic region of roughly a certain employee size range, roughly certain kinds of industries, and certain kind of stakeholders. So with all of that in mind, to improve your lead generation, that should give us a sense, since you're innovating for a specific kind of company and a specific kind of stakeholder in that company, that should give us a sense of who your ideal clients are. So you should be able to define that ICP, that ideal client profile, pretty well, to know geographically where they're located. When it comes to energy solutions, you're almost certainly going to be going on site as part of the sales and installation and ongoing service process. So thinking through like where you can have geographic coverage, you'll have a pretty good idea of the company sizes that are a pretty good fit, like how big do they need to be to afford the typical energy solutions that you'd market, sell, and service. And at what size is it highly likely that that particular company that you're a channel partner for may take the deal direct. And I'm not going to get into the philosophicals and the ethical issues of channel conflict and direct versus indirect, but if you've been doing this a while, you likely know that there's a finite ceiling on how big of a deal that you can realistically do before it gets way, way more complicated, or where it's just not possible for you to do deal registration or be successful with that kind of client. So be realistic, be self-aware about the company size ranges of what's too small and what's too big. And then what industries have been a particularly good match for what you do? And the reason that the industries, the vertical specialization becomes incredibly important is when you're talking about being a solution provider in this category in energy, it's very likely that you are in a crowded space. And one of the best ways for you to stand out as an expert is to have deeply niched expertise with one or more of your team members that have a lot of reps, that have a lot of experience, that have a lot of deep contacts working with certain kinds of data center related clients. It could be colocation operators. It could be telecommunications companies. It could be higher education with their own data centers. It could be government with their own data centers. Over time, you likely have hired a certain kind of account executive, a certain kind of solutions engineer, what have you, that brought depth of experience, brought deep experience from certain kind of niches or industries. They also likely have a lot of contacts within those accounts, either current accounts or future accounts. Lean into that heavily, because those folks on your team that understand those verticals not only understand the ecosystems and the communities that they should be participating in, they understand the language, they understand the people, they understand the issues. And because of that, when they're talking with prospects and clients, the prospects and clients feel like they're talking with a peer, not just an account executive or a solutions engineer from a vendor that's trying to sell them something. And the better job they can do with positioning themselves as a peer within these accounts, whether they're prospects or clients, the better it's going to be for everyone and all of the above. That, by definition, will influence how you set up your ideal client profile, your target account list, your buyer persona segmentation strategy. For sure, you likely or should at least likely have a separate page on your website for each of your vertical niches under like who we help, companies that benefit most from working with us. And if you have deep expertise in government and deep expertise in telecommunications and deep expertise among colocation operators, it sounds like you need 3 different pages. And those 3 different pages should have their own lead generation strategy throughout the full journey. There should be a lead generation premium content offer for the colocation operator, for the telecommunications company, for the government, for the higher education, whatever these niches are, covering the full journey: awareness, consideration, and decision. So if you have 3 different buyer personas and you're trying to cover the 3 different stages of the journey, you essentially need 3 different lead generation offers and a strategy to get people from awareness to consideration and accelerate them from consideration to decision. That's where your confirmation emails, that's where your confirmation pages come into play. But I'm very, very partial for this kind of business especially when it's in a tight geographic area, to using educational events as the real superpower for stronger, more effective, intentional lead generation. Because in the case of energy management, energy solutions, there's almost always something that you want to be demoing in person, right? And you're looking for clients that are in a tight geographic range where you can drive within a half hour, an hour to get there. So to the extent that your office has the ability to host small educational events on a regular basis, I would encourage you to run with that, and run with it early and run with it often. Early means that you're understanding really the full set of goals and challenges that one of these personas goes through in awareness and in consideration and decision. And you have topical content that covers each of these on an ongoing basis. When it comes to these events, I would encourage you to record them. There's almost always going to be multiple stakeholders from the same company, some of which are able to attend live, some of which are not. There'll be people that enter your world and become a lead after the event has taken place. And you're like, wow, you should have been at our month 4. You should have been at our April event. It was perfect. Here, let me send you the recording. Let me send you the slides so you can review this. And we want to see you at our upcoming event in July or whatever it is. So yeah, I definitely make them available live, make them available on demand. But the number one way for you to improve lead generation for this kind of company with approach of innovation, differentiation, competitive positioning is educating and building trust. And the best way to educate and build trust is educational events where you're teaching and establishing a trusted advisor relationship. And yes, the product demo for sure can be part of it, but it shouldn't be most of it. It's more like if they're coming in for a 90-minute event, it's 15, 20 minutes of networking and having some lunch or breakfast, your 30, 40-minute session with a little bit of Q&A. And then at the towards the middle to the end of that, that's an appropriate time to launch into giving a demo. And for anyone that wants to go deeper, for sure, you can schedule time with them or other stakeholders from their team. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to improve lead generation, I talk a lot about the idea of intentional lead generation. And I think where a lot of companies and a lot of their go-to-market teams get off track is different stakeholders on your team may have a different idea of what a lead is. Like for a marketer, a badge scan at a conference could be a lead. A subscriber to an email newsletter could be a lead. Someone downloading a special report or a planning guide, that's a lead. However, that may be a lead and it may even be a marketing qualified lead, but what your account executives get excited about is usually more of a sales opportunity than a lead. A sales opportunity is usually someone where they're a really good fit for your ideal client profile and they're showing strong signs of intent, strong signs of interest, and learning more about the data center energy solutions that you provide. So it's a combination of what's called fits. They're a really good fit for what you consider a qualified lead, and they're strong signs of interest or signs of high intent. That's usually what your sales team wants to see and what they consider leads. So keep in mind that just getting on the same page with how you categorize these different kinds of contacts in your CRM can make a world of difference to having a stronger working relationship among different members of your go-to-market team. But like as a basic back of the napkin, in the self-driven buyer's journey that we operate in now, where people are more sales allergic than ever, meaning that no one wants to spend a ton of time with salespeople anymore until they're almost ready to buy, it's incredibly important for us to figure out a way for you to get in early and often and get out of the vendor box. And the best way to get out of the vendor box, especially for a solution provider, solutions partner, is to have educational events that are of interest to very specific kinds of people for very specific kinds of reasons that get you a significant amount of surface area, a significant amount of face time in the awareness and the consideration stages of the journey. That means by definition that a lot of your marketers and your sales professionals and your account managers should look a lot more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, and trusted advisors, and a lot less by their traditional stereotypical kinds of roles. And with that in mind, your marketing professionals should be prepared to go much deeper into the journey than they may have historically done so in their career. And your sales professionals that may have historically brushed off a lot of the stuff as, that's marketing's job. Well, in a world where your prospects and clients don't want to talk to you anymore until they're almost ready to buy, if you don't meet them until they're almost ready to buy, That's not a good thing. In most cases, they're learning from someone else, and that someone else is usually a competitor of yours. So in order for you to stack the decks in your favor, it's super important to get in early enough so you can shape the criteria that they use for your category, in this particular case, energy solutions. If you happen to have deep expertise for a specific kind of buyer persona and the specific category, you should be involved in speaking at these kinds of events. If you're relatively new to the industry, if you don't understand this persona especially well, there's still a place for you as well. It's just you're more on the demand generation, signing people in, acting more as a concierge, helping to introduce, helping to moderate. But for sure, it's incredibly important for your account executives, your sales development reps, business development reps to be involved in these educational events to build deeper relationships with your prospects and clients. So this is the basic playbook at a high level that I would recommend for an innovative data center energy solutions provider that wants to improve its lead generation, is recognize that the last frontier for you to have significant surface area to get invited into their side of the table is being involved in their learning and development and their professional development. In order to do so, it's incredibly important to understand their biggest goals and their challenges that they're working through for each of these buyer personas, and to offer these fantastic educational events experiences that allow you to be part of how they learn how to do their job better, so they can better reach their individual goals, their team's goals, their company's goals, so they can best address their unique challenges and struggles, their team struggles, their company struggles at the intersection of anything and everything that's directly related to data center energy. That brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've been getting good value from this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button on whatever platform that you're watching. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments, again, on whatever platform you're watching from. So what is our final question? How does a data center sustainability and energy efficiency consultancy sell UPS and critical power? How does a data center sustainability and energy efficiency consultancy sell UPS and critical power? For starters, I love the idea that as a reseller of uninterruptible power supplies, battery backup, and critical power, I love the idea that as what could often just be a channel partner or reseller or manufacturer's rep in that particular product category, that you're positioning your company as focused on data center sustainability and energy efficiency. That in and of itself is great, and you should definitely pat yourself on the back for that. The question is, how can we more fully integrate that positioning into anything and everything that you do with your go-to-market, with your lead generation, and your sales cycle acceleration strategy? And what I would suggest is making sure that there's a really clear line of sight between your positioning on data center sustainability and data center energy efficiency and these products that your company either manufactures or resells. It's not really clear from this question as to whether you manufacture UPS and critical power products or whether you resell power products. It does make a difference, but in this particular context, not as much as you might think. So what I want to know is, for your data center sustainability and energy efficiency, who are your ideal clients? Where have you had the most success in the past? If we look at like your case studies, your testimonials, your reviews, your logos on your website, what's the commonality? What are we going to see across the board? Geographically, where are they located? How big or small are these companies? And what industries do they tend to be located in? If you can fill out that basic ideal client profile fundamentals, it goes a long way towards more effectively marketing and selling to the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, for the right reasons. And for the right reasons, in this particular case, is because we're positioning your company as the go-to experts, the be-all end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center sustainability and energy efficiency. So once we have a good handle on that ideal client profile, we can build out our target account list. And where the rubber really meets the road is understanding, in these accounts where you've been most successful, who are the most important economic stakeholders. And we want to rank them, prioritize them, so we know where to focus most of your efforts. So the most important economic stakeholder that you'd have in an account to ultimately is on the decision committee, or perhaps is even the decision maker for UPS and critical power, that person we're going to call your primary buyer persona. And the second most important kind of stakeholder that shows up in these kinds of decisions, that person we'll call your secondary buyer persona. In large enterprise accounts, there may even be a tertiary buyer persona. It's really, really important to get clear on those. Then once we know the people, we need to dial into what's going on in each of their worlds. What's top of mind for each of them, irrespective of whether we're talking about UPS's critical power, data center, sustainability, data center energy efficiency. So for our primary target person, our primary buyer persona, like what are their 5 or 6 biggest goals that they're currently working on professionally? These are things that they may talk about in the context of their OKRs, their objectives and key results, their KPIs that they measure, their key performance indicators, likely shows up in their job description, probably even shows up to a certain degree on their LinkedIn profile, in their about section, or in the couple of sentences or paragraph or two about what they do in their current job. So when we look at each of your buyer personas, starting with your primary, is we want to look at a minimum of 5 or 10 representative people, and we want to find the consensus about, for this particular persona, what are their 5 or 6 biggest goals. And we need to not only know the consensus, we need to know those 5 or 6 biggest goals in their own words. Not what you think those words are, but what those words actually are, because we've done our homework and we found the consensus. And when you understand that, and especially when you understand, like in frequency order, which one comes up most often, second most often, that goes a long way to helping you have website copywriting, product marketing, sales enablement, email marketing, social posts, event marketing strategy, all of the above, that really resonates with having messaging that really is highly relevant to who they are and what's top of mind for them. So that's on the goals side. In addition to the goals, we also want to understand what they're struggling with the most. What are their biggest stressors? What are their biggest challenges? What's messing with their work-life balance? What potentially is even screwing with their mental health? What's certainly making it really difficult for them to unplug and go on vacation from time to time when it comes to anything and everything having to do with uninterruptible power supply, UPS, critical power, data center sustainability, energy efficiency. And again, we're going to do this because we're doing our actual homework. We're having these conversations in person, by video, by phone. We're doing surveys. We're looking at their LinkedIn profiles. We're looking at their search footprint. We're really getting to the bottom of these biggest goals and challenges for each of these segments. And that's going to drive creating these buyer persona blueprints that we'll use for everything that we do going forward with lead generation, sales cycle acceleration, educating, and building trust. And then we need to do the exact same thing with our secondary buyer persona and our tertiary buyer persona. And at the end of the day, what we really are trying to do is to exert strong topical expertise on data center sustainability and data center energy efficiency for each of these segments. One of the ways that you can do this is having fantastic podcast kind of content, video content, downloadable premium content, tools and calculators on your website. And I'm especially partial to educational events. These educational events could be virtual, kind of like this, live streams, webinars, webinar series. They could also be in-person events that you host in your own facility. Now, what's different about these events that I want to emphasize is these events are all about education. This is very different than having a booth at an expo, where education is very secondary, and you're lucky if you can get a couple of minutes from time to time if people come by and watch a little demo or a little explanation that you do for 5 or 10 minutes every 15 minutes or something like that. What we're looking for is we're looking to get in much the same way that someone that's a webinar producer focuses on the average minutes that someone attends, or someone that's a content creator that creates YouTube videos is average minutes, average view duration. We're looking to do the same thing. We're looking to get as much face time. We're looking to get as much attention of the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So these prioritized buyer personas see your internal experts as the be-all end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center sustainability and energy efficiency. Now, to the extent that you have internal subject matter experts that can do this, that's fantastic. If at some point you exhaust your internal subject matter experts, you certainly can bring in channel partners, you can bring in external consultants, you can bring in subject matter experts from vendors that you work with. But at the end of the day, the goal should be to have incredibly valuable educational events experiences for that specific kind of person and a specific kind of company of roughly that size who wants to learn all about data center sustainability and energy efficiency to help them do their job better. Again, that's the key unlock with all of this, is positioning what you're doing as part of their professional development, part of their learning and development. So it's so good that they keep coming back each month. This is a monthly series. It's not one and done. It's early and often, with a big emphasis on often. 28, 25 to 30 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. We want you to dominate the surface area, dominate the number of touch points, and that these educational events are so great that the next time around, they're bringing more people from their team. And at some point, you're having significant surface area coverage of the full decision committee, perhaps even including that person's boss or other people that are on their team. The whole goal is that we want it to be incredibly painfully obvious to the people that are attending that when it comes to data center energy efficiency, when it comes to data center sustainability, that you have some of the top experts on the planet for this specific job function and this specific kind of company in the particular geographic region of roughly company size. And the better job you do that, the more they're going to learn and grow together as individual stakeholders from the company, and you're going to better align how they see the world, their frameworks, their best practices when it comes to anything and everything, with picking the right kind of UPS investments and critical power investments. So that's the key with connecting the dots on all of this, is using their goals and challenges as your educational events calendar. And as part of these educational events experiences, there will be a natural time. And again, the amount of natural time varies by context and by company, but it could be as much as 10, 15, 20% of that event can be a little bit of product information, a little bit of product demo about what's hot, what's new, some cool things that you want to call to their attention that are unique to the products and what you're doing with these UPS and critical products and services that you have available for this particular niche. But lead primarily with education. That's all about their biggest goals and challenges. For sure, if there's a 45-minute presentation, 4.5 to 9 minutes of it can be about some things that are product related. But just bear in mind, in most cases, unless you explicitly make this the event title or the headline, most people are probably not coming to be demoed to. They're coming to learn. As part of the learning, if there are some natural things to point out in some of the UPS and critical power products that you have available, by all means. But again, they're coming primarily to learn. And the better job you do with putting deposits into that relationship bank account, where they see your internal subject matter experts as the top experts on the planet for this topic, for sustainability and energy efficiency, this particular kind of company, the more likely it is that a lot of very strong and very powerful things happen with getting you on the short list, keeping you on the short list, naturally knocking some of the competitive forces off of the short list, because they're just learning so much from your internal team members that they want to keep coming back and learning over and over again. And it's a very natural extension to doing business with you in the near future. So what we're trying to do is to figure out these 5 or 6 biggest goals, these 5 or 6 biggest challenges that are a leading indicator that this particular person is going to be in market for UPS and critical power in the coming weeks and in the coming months. And the better job you do at this, the more likely it is that you're building extreme know, like, and trust. You're doing a fantastic job of educating and building trust with the exact people who are going to be members of the decision committee in these particular accounts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center sustainability, data center energy efficiency, UPS, and critical power. So that's how I would approach how a data center sustainability and energy efficiency consultancy can more effectively sell UPS and critical power. So that is the final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter for free on our website, so you can get notified in your email inbox each Sunday at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to be sure to, in your connection note, be sure to mention that you watch the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and I'd be happy to be connected with you on LinkedIn. So again, we're so glad that you're able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We wish you great success in growing your influence, your team's influence, and your company's influence in the data center, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure ecosystem. Look forward to seeing you back again next week. Take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.